Well, warm welcome to everyone today. We're so glad that you're with us. If you're there at Pitt Meadows, great to see you out today. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us there in the theater. And then if you're at Strathcona, huge welcome to you. Glad for what God's doing there. So excited for what's on the horizon as we're praying and looking into having an Eden team part of what we're doing in Strathcona. And then, of course, if you're commercial, right there. What a great spot to be, right by the SkyTrain intersection there. We know that God's doing great things at Commercial. Excited to have you there with us today. Then, of course, if you're watching online, man, so good to have you with us. And know that God's got something for you today. Wherever you are, you might be watching while you're traveling. You might be in a hotel room, maybe in another country, watching in your home. But we're glad that you're there. We feel part of you. Hopefully you feel part of us, and we're praying for you. So let's get into the message for today. As you know, we're in the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' classic, it's a text, it's a constitution, it's really the manifesto by which we live out our Christian life. It's ethics from another world, in our broken world. He taught us how we could follow and how we could live, how we could be disciples. And so today we're going to look a little bit deeper into that. What would life be like if we followed him really closely? That is what the Sermon on the Mount was all about. Today, as we're in the Sermon on the Mount, we're at a bit of a transition point. We start off in Matthew chapter 5. You remember the Beatitudes. We went through those 8 Beatitudes. And then Jesus said, you are the salt, you're the light. That was the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount. And then he says, I didn't come to destroy the law of the prophets. I came to fulfill it. He gave us the great commandment to love God and love our neighbors ourselves. And that happens right after the Beatitudes and after he talks about us being salt and light. And that actually forms kind of a bookend. And then we went through Matthew 5, Matthew 6, Matthew 7. And during that period of time, he's talking to us about how do we handle whether it be adultery, anger, all kinds of other issues, prayer, fasting. Really, how do we live out this life as a follower? Now, when we get to Matthew chapter 7, we're at another bookend, because in verse 12, he again gives us the golden rule. Do unto others as you'd want them to do unto you. So, following this bookend, we're now going to come to Jesus really challenging us to make a choice. This week, and then upcoming weeks, we're going to talk about things. Today we're going to talk about 2 gates. He'll talk about 2 types of trees and 2 types of foundation. So today we're going to look at the 2 different types of gates. And really what Jesus is saying, I've given you a description how to live. Now I'm saying you've got to make a choice. And if you're from Canada, we have lots of choices. Maybe you're watching in another part of the world, you don't have as many choices as we do. But man, do we have a lot of choices today. I don't know what it's like for you guys, but when I grew up, we had like 2 choices of milk. You could either have skim milk or whole milk, you know. And today, when you go to the store, you can get 0.5%, 1%. You can get almond milk, cashew milk, and all kinds of other milk. You have a whole shelf full of milk. When I grew up, well, actually, on the farm that I grew up, we had one choice, cow's milk, and that's all we had. But today, there's so many choices of milk. We have choices of, I was thinking about the choices of cereal we had in our house. We had cornflakes, and we had Shreddies, and we had oatmeal, and we had Sunny Boy. I don't know if anybody remembers Sunny Boy. We had Sunny Boy cereal, and sometimes cream of wheat. Now, those were our cereal choices. But today, if you go to a grocery store, you can have aisles of just different types of cereal. Matter of fact, I heard in Montreal, there's a new restaurant that opened up recently, and they serve cold cereal. And people go there and they'll fill up their bowls with cereal, and it's just served cereal. So, lots of choices. And then, of course, when I grew up, we had no choices when it came to water. We had water, and hot water and cold water, and that was it. But today, really, I mean, you can buy hundreds of different types of bottled water, flavored water, mineral water. There's so many choices. Well, in this text, we have 2 choices. And Jesus is going to talk about a narrow way and a broad way, a narrow gate and a wide gate. So let's look at these choices. You know, Matthew 7, verses 13 to 14, we'll put that up on the screen here. And if you're watching there at Pitt Meadows or at Strathcona Commercial, even if you're watching online, let's read this out loud together. These are our two verses for the message today. So here we go. Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Well, today we're believing that if you haven't found it, you are going to find it, and you'll know that there is a gate that you can go through. It's interesting that God really, he leaves the choice to us. In Deuteronomy, there's a classic verse that says, I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I've set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life that both you and your seed may live. So he's called them to make a choice. This is Moses speaking on behalf of God. I've called you to make a choice. Later on, Joshua would say to the people, you know, you can serve the gods of your fathers, or you can serve God, the living God. And then he goes on to say, you know what, but as for me, my house, we're going to serve God. That's been my choice. Moses put it out there. Joshua put it out there. Elijah, when he stood on Mount Carmel and he challenged the people, you guys got to make a decision. Who are you going to serve? Are you going to serve this God, or are you going to serve the living God? So throughout the scriptures, God has said, I'm going to give you a choice. We're not puppets. We're not robots. God places within us the ability to make the choice. It's a choice between our way, really, and God's way. It's a choice between our own righteousness, right doing, and Jesus' righteousness. Now, we don't have an option to say, well, I don't want to choose. You have no choice but to choose. You have to make a choice on it. So today we're going to talk about the gates. And there are two gates. One gate is narrow, and one gate is wide. So he talks here in this about, first of all, two gates. There's a narrow gate. There's a wide gate. And he's saying, I want you to find the narrow gate. There's a wide gate, there's a narrow gate. When it comes to the wide gate, to start with the wide gate, let's start there. The wide gate attracts people in many ways. He says many people go through it. But I think one of the things that attracts people, it's really deceptive. They think, that's where the party's going to happen. I don't even remember if you remember a song that came out a number of years ago now, but they play it at a lot of concerts and different times, even theme songs. It's an old song by AC/DC. It'll date me, but it was called On a Highway to Hell. And you just saying it, I hear it singing through my head, so I don't want to do that to you, Dave. But there was this song by AC/DC, I'm on a highway to hell. And it talked about, hey, one of the parts of the lyrics was, ask me nothing, let me be. And it's talking about, I'm on this highway, I know where I'm going, and I'm going there to have a party. And which is such a deception, because actually, the further you go down that road, the more lonely you get, the more hurting it is. It's the exact opposite. And so one of the reasons people enter into the wide gate is it's because of deception. It has no restrictions concerning your belief or behavior. And it looks right because so many people are going that way. So you think, well, it must be right. It doesn't require you to give up anything. You can come as you are. There's no changes necessary. Really what you're saying, God, leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. I want to be my own God, and so I'm going to take this path. You enter it by your own works. You say, I want to do it. There's some that they're not necessarily partying. They're living a very religious life, and they're saying, I will work to God, and I want to pick my own beliefs, and I'll work that out, but I'm in charge. So that's the wide gate. The narrow gate is a little bit different. Now, as we're going into this, as we're thinking about these two choices, what we want to keep in mind is not the gate as much as the destination. When you embark on a trip, you think about, well, where am I going to end up? And then from there, you kind of do a road map and you plan it out. And so with this, you want to think about, well, where do I want to end up? We're not talking about retirement. We're talking about eternity. Where do I want to spend eternity. So that really has to be the starting point of this decision. So let's talk about the narrow gate. 2 gates. One is narrow, one is wide. Let's talk about the narrow gate for a bit. The narrow gate is what Jesus said we should go to it. And we go there because I think one of the things that draws us to the narrow gate is the truth. Remember, Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. There's a hunger for truth. And when you go looking for truth, eventually you're going to find Jesus. John 14:10, you remember this verse, very famous verse? We'll put it on the screen. Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the what? Life. No one can come to the Father except through me. Now, some will have issue with this verse because it's very exclusive. Jesus says, I am the way. I am the truth. And also in John chapter 10, verse 9, he said, yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. He didn't just say, I am the way, the truth, and life. He said, I am the gate. He said, I am this narrow gate that you have to go through. I am the way. I am the truth. You come to him through him. This gate requires self-sacrifice and obedience. In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus said, this is out of the Message Bible, where it reads, Matthew chapter 16, 24 and 25. Then Jesus went to work on his disciples. He's teaching them. Anyone who intends to come with me. So let's just stop there. For I intend to come with Jesus. This whole Sermon on the Mount is I intend to come with Jesus. I intend to be your follower. So he's talked about you in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the poor in spirit. He talked about the Beatitudes. And you're the salt, you're the light. Then he gave us this bookend again about love God, love your neighbors yourself. Then there was this instruction period. Then a bookend again, which was the golden rule, following me. So if you intend to follow me, you've been paying attention to the Sermon on the Mount, Coastal Church, and you intend to follow me. He's as much as he was working on the disciples, hasn't he been working on us in this series? I know he's been working on my life. So he said, anyone who intends to come with me has to what? Let me lead. And we live in a culture where, no, I want to lead. I want to be in charge. He says, if you're following me through this narrow gate, then I will lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. Follow me, and I'll show you how. And he goes on to say, self-help is no help at all. That's the other way, the broad way. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, to finding yourself, your true self. I think one of the greatest benefits of going through the narrow gate is you truly, not only you find Jesus, you find yourself, you find your purpose, you find your identity, because he designed us. So that's one of the greatest benefits of going through the narrow gate. How do we come into that narrow gate? Well, we do it by grace. When you come into that narrow gate, I can't bring all my good works with me. Say, oh, you know what? I get to go through this narrow gate, Jesus, because I did all the right things. I qualify. I have to leave that all behind. Or I can't stand at that narrow gate and say, I don't qualify to go through because of all the bad things that I've done. No, we come through it by grace. Even as Paul said in Ephesians, by grace you've been saved through faith. Not as a result of my works, so no one can boast. That's how I come into it. Now, this narrow gate, picture a turnstile. You know, when we get on the SkyTrain, you have these turnstile. You have to go through one at a time. And as we come through this narrow gate, it is narrow. It's one at a time. It's not a big parking lot with big open gates. You come through there one at a time. And when I come through, I have to leave my baggage behind. Now, on the wide way, you can take as much baggage as you want. It doesn't matter. Anything's permissible. But on this narrow gate, I have to come in just laying my life down, all my bad baggage, all my good works. I leave it there, and I step through the turnstile and say, Jesus, I accept you and follow you. I am here only because of what you've done for me. Then I come through that. Somebody had once put it this way, and I thought it was a good way to put it. They said, Christ plus something things that I want to bring with me equals nothing. But Christ plus nothing equals everything. We have been blessed with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. And sometimes you think, well, if I come through that, if I am a follower of Jesus, what will all I have to give up? There are some things that you give up, but on the other side of that gate is this amazing life of following Christ. So there are two gates. There's a narrow gate and there's a wide gate. When we go in this narrow gate, we're taking nothing with us. We just surrender our lives and say, Lord, I come. Remember that old song? There was an old song, you may not remember, but there's an old song, just as I am, I come. And so we come there and we enter through that narrow gate. So there's two gates, but there's also two ways. Jesus talked in this passage about two ways. There was a narrow way. It's also said a straight way. One of the words translated literally means a difficult way. And then there's also the broad way. So let's talk about the different ways for a bit. Two ways. Two gates, two ways. So let's talk about the different ways. First of all, the broad way has some characteristics about it. On the broad way, this may sound very familiar, you expect to be tolerant, free, open-minded, permissive. Everyone's truth is permitted. It's kind of it's like anything goes. And it's a role where any type of pleasure can be pursued. There's a verse that I like in Hebrews 11:25. It's a pseudo-pleasure, really, because as we know about Moses, he chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. There's a choice that Moses made. He said, I know if I take this route, a narrow way, there's going to be some mistreatment. But I'd rather choose that than the fleeting pleasures of sin. You know, the Bible tells us that there is pleasure in sin for a season. And when you first start off on this broad way, it feels like, oh, this is so good. But actually, the further you go along, the more challenging it becomes. And all of a sudden, the thing that you thought was giving you freedom and all the rest of it, you end up becoming a slave to it. Oh, I can do anything I want here. I can party as much as I want, and all of a sudden I become addicted to that. I can have as much money, I can pursue that, and all of a sudden it's controlling my life. The very things you thought were freedom end up controlling you. And Moses saw that, and so that's a great verse that ties in here. There's also a pseudo type of power where I want control. Pride's on that road. There's a pseudo kind of piety, a false religion on that road. So again, Jesus said, two gates, two roads, two paths. So that's the broad way. But then he also talks about the narrow way. I want to focus on the narrow way. The narrow way, we can walk securely because Jesus is our guide. Man, I love that. If I knew it was just a gate, but Jesus wouldn't walk with me every step of the way, I don't think we could do it. But he says, come, follow me. And he's there ahead of us, step by step. Jesus isn't just the gate, Jesus is the way. And so when I'm following him, he's watching over me. In Proverbs 2, verse 8, he says, he guards our path. The safest place to be is in God's will. It may look dangerous, it may look challenging, but the safest place to be is right where you're following Jesus. There's a great verse in John chapter 8, verses 31, 32. Jesus said to those who believed him, you shall abide in my word, and you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. You're familiar with that verse. But notice it says, if you abide in my word. See, right there, I come through that. Jesus, of course, is the word. We're drawn to this gate, and then we go through it. And then the key is to walk on the narrow way. You think the narrow way would be restrictive. You think the narrow way there'd be no fun, no joy, no peace. But actually, it's the other thing. It's the other way. That's where the greatest joy, the greatest peace comes from, is when I'm following here. And you would think, oh, but it could be dangerous. But no, when I look to Jesus and I keep my eye on him, how do I keep my eye on him? I focus on his word. Oh, you know, there's a verse that talks about how Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, he authored our faith. When he authored our faith, that's me going through the gate. He started it. And then every step of the way, your life is like a story. And Jesus is guiding you every paragraph, every word, every sentence. He's finishing the story. And the way that happens is I just keep my eyes focused on him, focused on his word. And that becomes the safest place to be. Say, well, it's a narrow way. It is a narrow way, but it's the safest place. Now, if along the way I take my eyes off Jesus, kind of the way Peter took his eyes off the Lord when he was walking on the water, you begin to sink. Does Jesus abandon you? No, he doesn't abandon you. He reaches down and lifts you up. So even if I took my eyes off Jesus, he's so gracious to keep me on that path. I think some of you are watching today saying, you know, I don't know if I want to take that path because I don't think I can do it. I think I'll take that path and I'm going to mess up. I'm going to fall back. Something's going to pull me off track. And then what am I going to do? You know, I'm so grateful for God's grace. There's a verse that says, he who began a good work in you at the gate, he will complete it until the day of Christ Jesus. Jesus isn't some hitchhiker who says, oh, I'm only going to go for the first mile and then I'm going to jump off and then you're on your own. No, he is with us the entire way. Wow. And you don't have that on the Broadway. You got a lot of people doing a lot of things, but you don't have that. Jesus is walking with you. When I grew up on the farm, we had to plant the crop. We had to also cultivate. And when I was first learning how to plant the crop seed, my dad told me, okay, you're on your own. This time you get to plant the crop. And so I put the seed into the drill, and I'm driving and did all the seeding. And of course, nothing comes up for a couple of weeks. About 2 or 3 weeks later, my dad says, Dave, I want you to go for a little walk with me out into the field. I said, okay, what happened? What's up? Just come with me. Go for a little walk. So we go for a little walk, and I had planted. I thought I did a pretty good job, you know, because I worked hard, and we walked out, and you know, this is a field here, nice field, and all the rows were coming up. All the rows of grain were coming up, and he pointed that out to me, and they're pretty good. And then there was this row. And then there's some more rows. And so my dad says, what happened here? and what my dad taught me to do was, in order to keep it straight, there'd be a fence post on this side here. And he said, when you're driving this way, don't look right in front of you. You look at the fence post. When I've taught my children to drive a car, I had to teach them, don't look right in front of the car. You're going to veer into the other lane. Just look further down the road, and you'll drive straight. Well, same thing with a tractor. My dad said, you know, no, look here at the fence post, and then go. And he said, you were doing pretty good. You must have been looking at the fence post. But what happened over here? I said, well, you know, the dog was falling behind the cedar, and there was some mice that were there, and so he was chasing them, and I kind of got my eyes off of the fence post, and I went over here, and so that's why he said, well, we're going to have to go back and reseed this. And so the point was, I'd taken my eyes off of the post, so to speak. When you take your eyes off Jesus, you're not disqualified. He comes alongside you and says, okay, let me lift you up and keep you on this path. I'm so grateful for his grace. You can enter that gate with confidence. He said, I'll never leave you. I'll never desert you. I'll never forsake you. Some of you are here for our concert of prayer and praise night. And remember, we talked about that. So many of you came forward because you've been forsaken by a loved one. It might have been a father figure. It might have been a coach. It might have been a friend. And they just forsook you. And you said, what? I thought we were friends. I thought we were family, and you forsook me. Jesus never forsakes you. Sometimes when you make a mistake like that in life, you lose your job, People don't want to associate with you. Jesus always wants to associate with you. You're his child, and he loves you. So I think part of this stepping into this way, the cost of discipleship is huge. But you're never alone. Jesus walks with you every single step of the way. One of the books that I was reading in conjunction with our Sermon on the Mount is a book about the Sermon on the Mount by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and it's called The Cost of Discipleship. And in there, he writes, to confess and testify to the truth as it is in Jesus, at the same time to love the enemies of that truth, his enemies and ours, and to love them with infinite love of Christ is indeed a narrow way. To believe the promise of Jesus that his followers shall possess the earth, at the same time to face their enemies unarmed and defenseless, preferring to incur injustice rather than to do wrong ourselves, is indeed a narrow way. To seek the weakness and wrong in others, and to see the weakness and wrong in others, at the same time refrain from judging them, to deliver the gospel message without casting pearls before swine, is indeed a narrow way. The way is unalterably hard, and at every moment we are in danger of straying from it. If we regard this way as one we follow in obedience to an external command, if we are afraid of ourselves all the time, it is indeed an impossible way. But, this is good, if we behold Jesus Christ going on before us step by step, we shall not go astray. But if we worry about the dangers that beset us, if we gaze at the road instead of him who goes before us, we're already straying from the path. For he himself is the way, the narrow way, the straight way. He alone is our journey's end. You get that? Jesus is our gate, Jesus is our way, and Jesus is our end. When we know that, we are able to proceed along the narrow way through the straight gate of the cross and onto eternal life, and the very narrowness of the road will increase our certainty. Sometimes you feel the road's narrow. It's a confirmation that you're on the right path. So we had two ways. We've got to wrap this up. There's also two destinations. We had two gates, two ways, two destinations. We start off really by thinking about what is our destination? When you're at the gate, maybe you're at that gate today and you need to make a decision. And by the way, if you said, well, I chose the broad way a long time ago, can I get off the broad way and go to the narrow gate? The answer is yes, you can make that change. Two destinations. One is life, now and evermore, and one is destruction, according to Jesus, his words. And may I say, when you follow Jesus through that narrow gate, life kicks in now. The kingdom is now. Kingdom's already within us. Yes, we'll spend eternity in heaven with him, but that's now. When we enter the broad way, that broad gate, that broad way, the destruction may not come right away, but you and I both know people who've chosen the wrong path in life and the destruction that came, let alone the destruction that comes through all eternity. So we want to think about the destination in mind when we're going forward. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 1, here's what Paul had to say. Since you've been raised to new life with Christ, you've come through that gate, set your sights on the realities of heaven. That's where we have to focus, because there's challenging times. But Jesus wants us to think about eternity, about life with him. Realities of heaven where Christ sits at the place of honor with God. C.S. Lewis, a great author, wrote, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. And whether you're in Pitt Meadows, Commercial, Strathcona, watching online, you are made for another world. We are pilgrims passing through. We have our citizenship in heaven, and we have to keep that in mind. This life's a vapor. It's, when you have a hot cup of coffee, and when you first pour it, you got the little wisp of steam coming off of it. That's our life. And then comes eternity. So we have to keep that destination in mind on this great choice. The destination of destruction. Boy, a lot we could say about that. Jesus spoke a lot about it. More than any other author, he spoke about the realities of heaven, yes, but he also talked about the realities of hell. Tim Keller, he had this to say, we run from the presence of God, and therefore God actively gives us up to our desire. Hell is therefore a prison in which the doors are first locked from the inside by us, and therefore are locked from the outside by God. because we made that choice a long time ago when we went through that white gate. God says, well, then if you want to continue to walk in that choice, then I have to honor that decision you made. C.S. Lewis had this to say, in the long run, the answer to all those who object to the doctrine of hell is itself a question. What are you asking God to do? To wipe out every past sin and at all costs to give them a fresh start? Smoothing every difficulty and offering miraculous help? Is that what you're asking? But he has done so on Calvary to forgive them. They will not be forgiven. To leave them alone, alas, I am afraid that is what he does. In other words, what the very thing you're asking God to do, he's done through Jesus. And now he said, hey, why don't you choose this way? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. We live in a world that needs to make that choice. So I'm going to invite our campus pastors to come up at Pitt Meadows, Commercial, Strathcona. And if you're watching online, we're also going to be there to just take you the next steps and to pray with you. So please come up, campus pastors, and they'll just share a couple of thoughts with you and pray with you. This past week, I guess the past 2 weeks, we thought a lot about what happened at Manchester, the bombing that took place there, prayed a lot for that city. And with Andy Hawthorne with us last week, we were thinking a lot about that, praying for it, hearing his story right there at Ground Zero, their team that was working amongst that. And there was an interesting article that caught my eye in the National Post, and it was talking about what to do when we have tragedy and you don't believe in God. And the fellow who wrote this says, terrorism blows up beliefs alongside bodies. Our whole liberal system of thought is centered around the idea that societies can improve, perfected even, through education and science. But events such as Manchester arena bombing remind us that in critical ways nothing has changed since the era of Viking raids, and that when we promise our children we'll keep them safe, we're speaking in white lies. And he went on to say, on Wednesday, the teacher at Safi's school in England, one of the girls he mentioned, held a special assembly at which the students shed tears, observed a moment of silence, and sang the journey anthem, Don't Stop Believing. The school principal urged everyone to hold on to love among us. The memorial Facebook pages for other Manchester victims also reflect this vague but admirable humane idea that we should respond to tragedy by loving one another. It is sentimental and unsatisfying, but without God by our side, it's the best we can do. You know what? I'm so glad as I journey down this road, when tragedy happens, we are to love one another, but I'm so glad that we know that there is an eternity, that I can spend my loved ones will be there. I can know that I have a promise of heaven ahead of me. And I don't know what choice you've made, but it's not just for life now on this earth, a more fulfilled life, a life of joy and peace, true joy, but it's also what lies ahead, an eternal destination. Wherever you're at today, whether you're watching in Brazil or you're watching in Switzerland, wherever you're watching online, there's two gates. And Jesus is standing at the gate, and he has laid down his life. You see, he went to hell for us. When he died on the cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He never wanted any of us to experience that destruction. So he said, I will go there, and I will do that so you never have to experience that. And I offer you this life. So today, right where you're watching, Jesus is offering it to you. Don't be afraid to step through the gate. You found it. He said, find the narrow gate. You found it, which is fantastic. Now take that step of faith and step through. Leave your baggage behind. Leave your failures behind. Leave your sins behind, and just step through that gate. Jesus is there with you. He is the way. He'll walk with you. He'll never leave you, forsake you. And there's eternity waiting for you because you've accepted what he's done at the cross when he took your punishment and died for your sins. So, right where you're watching, would you bow your head with me? Let's say a simple prayer where you can walk through that gate and receive Christ into your life. Just repeat after me. Dear Heavenly Father, today I open up my heart. I receive your love. I receive your forgiveness. I step through the narrow gate, and I choose to follow you. I know you'll never leave me. You'll never forsake me. And I will spend an eternity with you. Amen.